G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here, with part 12 in the partial book reading series of One Crowded Hour by Tim Bowden, the biography of Neil Davis, Combat Cameraman. Part 12 is the second half of chapter 14. The safest place is in the front line, which at first glance appears counterintuitive. But Neil Davis was kind of the resident expert, and do you see him following the Army of the Republican of Vietnam patrol here? To me, it kind of looks like the ARVN infantry are following Neil Davis. And there's another journalist who has gone across the river to take this still picture. That there American copy of a German MP-42 machine gun, aka the M60, it sure kind of looks to me as if it's set up for immediate use. So he certainly wasn't very far behind the front line. And here's why. I'll just reread that final paragraph to keep things more or less continuous. The Bell and Howell camera became a part of me, an extension of my arm. Everything became automatic. By using this gear, I was much more mobile and able to get more worthwhile film. I could always go to the extreme front line to film. The main reason is that was where the best spontaneous film is. Contrary to popular belief, it was not, Davis believed, the most dangerous place. That was the second or third line, several hundred metres behind, because the troops there were more likely to be shelled, mortared, rocketed, or hit by propelled grenades. The enemy's aim would be to knock out the command post for the attacking unit, and the area would be peppered with thousands of pieces of shrapnel. I don't like shrapnel because you can be killed any one of 1,000, 10,000 pieces of metal from one shell slicing through you. I preferred bullets in the front line because you take cover from your immediate front and you don't have to worry about things dropping on top of you or around you. During one desperate action in 1965, Davis's unit was actually in hand-to-hand combat while South Vietnamese Sky Raider aircraft bombed and strafed within 50 metres of his position. Many of our unit were being killed and wounded by shrapnel from our own bombing. I lay down alongside one body and pulled a corpse half over me as a sort of wall of protection. That was the occasion where the front line and the shrapnel were too close for comfort. A lot of people used to think I was foolish because I always went forward with the advancing troops, and I even heard the expression death wish used. That was absurd. If I was going to cover an action, I wanted to be in the best place to film, and the safest place in my way of thinking was the immediate front line. You can't get the spontaneity of the action if you are not there. There is no use trying to get it with a telephoto lens from the second or third line. You don't see the faces and the expressions on those faces, the compassion they may show for their wounded comrades or their enemy, for that matter. You are also testing the unknown and something that has to be experienced to assess your own capabilities. He was an adrenaline junkie, a danger junkie, a death junkie. He just happened to be a really, really, really good cinematographer, combat cameraman. Neil Davis. Perhaps the ultimate combat cameraman? He was trying to model himself on Damien Parra, the Australian combat cameraman who died filming action in New Guinea against the Japanese in World War II. Flip side of that photographic plate are his Cambodian press credentials from 1970. You are also testing the unknown and something that has to be experienced to assess your own capabilities properly. Most people are not sure how they're going to react under great personal stress and tension. That's always an unknown. The ultimate, I suppose, is to be placed in a position when your life is threatened and you have to make a decision which may save your life or kill you. Not to be in the front line meant what Davis called aftermath film, in which the viewer sees wounded soldiers coming back and guns and artillery can be heard in the distance. Battle photographers could suffer a dangerous delusion. Because they watched the action through a camera lens, they would begin to feel displaced from the violence around them. You are looking through a viewfinder which looks very much like a television screen, blocking off everything else. You simply have to keep reminding yourself that this is not so. As a professional athlete, Davis had learned a lot about reaction speeds. He calculated that it took at least a quarter of a second for the mind to assess a situation and give the order for the limbs to move, which could be a long time when bullets were flying. You first hit the ground. That's the first cover. Don't run to the nearest tree or you are dead. You have to keep an eye on what the troops are doing and maybe roll over and over towards a small indentation in the ground and then perhaps make it to a tree or a paddy dyke. There was also the all-important question of luck, and sometimes Davis needed every point of the 10% he felt was involved. On one occasion in the Mekong Delta area south of Saigon in 1966, I was moving across open paddy fields with an ARVN unit. There were a few tussocks and bushes, but not much obvious cover. Suddenly, a Viet Cong jumped up only about 3 metres ahead of us and shot the radio operator dead. The Viet Cong sniper was shot and killed seconds later, but he had selected the radio operator out of a group of 5, which included the battalion commander, his adjutant, an American advisor, and Davis. It was, Davis conceded, just blind chance and luck that he himself had not been the target. Selecting the right unit to accompany was also a key factor in survival. You had to have confidence in a unit. If you didn't, it was better not to go. Davis preferred regular army units to part-time reservists, as they were continually in combat and had time to develop their sixth sense. Notice the ant crawling across the page. In a small unit, you would get to know the soldiers right down to the last man, as well as the commander. The commander quite often was not good, and you had to watch that. If he was a political appointee or had been given the job because of his wealth or influence, it was best not to go with him, unless he happened also to be a good soldier. A career soldier was the best proposition. Don Simmons, an Australian Broadcasting Commission journalist who also covered the fighting war, remembers the high quality of Neil's early work in Vietnam. His film was never just a collection of shots. Feeling was always there. Maybe it was expressed in shots of tight, taut faces, children, burnt hands, and the humanity of war to underline its basic inhumanity. Davis was a film essayist who composed his stories in his camera, often using less than 100 feet of film to fix details in a sequence, able to engage the viewer and expand comprehension. He believed that frontline combat brought out the best in people. You see a person stripped of all pretensions, and if they do have annoying or irritating personal habits, that is completely unimportant. What is important is how they react in the most dramatic situation you can present them with, when your lives are on the line. A very close understanding and camaraderie develops from that. That friendship could even cross over to the other side, which Davis found personally most rewarding. It was most often seen following the capture of prisoners. Initially, there's a sort of anger, and it's very dangerous for the prisoners. After all, until a few moments before, both sides have been trying to kill each other. They can be killed in the first minute or two, but if they survive that, they are treated more or less as comrades. On their way back to the rear lines, villagers sometimes get angry and want to get at the prisoners, and the soldiers protect them because they identify with their situation. The Americans could feel that too. In November 1967, the Americans took Hill 875 in the Central Highlands. It was called that simply because it was 875 metres high. There had been a 3-day battle as the North Vietnamese defenders on the mountain were pounded with artillery and airstrikes. No communist soldiers on top of Hill 875 could survive. It was devastated. Every tree was knocked down and stripped of all its leaves. There were great craters everywhere, and its deep bunkers were breached, and there were bodies in every position. I was with an American infantryman as he looked down into a bunker with several North Vietnamese soldiers who had died at their weapons, and he said very quietly, "Poor bastards." He understood their situation. Okay, well, I will commence probably a four-part reading of chapter 15, Gooks, Dinks and Slopes, on another day, when I continue my partial book reading series of One Crowded Hour, the biography by Tim Bowden of Neil Davis, combat cameraman, the professional foreign correspondent who saw more of the Vietnam War than any Australian or American serviceman who ever fought in it. Warbles not a lot to YouTube. Ciao.